Good evening. This is Mae Brussell, KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove, California. This is broadcast number 598, May the 23rd, 1983, side one of the tape cassette that is taken off the air and broadcast simultaneously. The tapes go out by subscription. That's why we number them. Sometimes the listeners on the station don't understand why each broadcast is numbered. Usually I begin the program by saying what we discussed 1 year ago tonight. I forgot to do that last week, so I'll just skip back to May 16th briefly. Tape number 545, May the 16th, 1982. A year ago last week, because I forgot to mention it, I went into detail about a man who was written up in the magazine Gung Ho, May 1982. The author was William Seymour, Seymour. That's the same name as the anti-Castro Cuban that worked with Lee Harvey Oswald and the Lee Harvey Oswald doubles. The article is called The CIA's Man for All Nations. I can't assume it's the same person that worked with Oswald, but because the person he's writing about did work with the anti-Castro Cubans that killed John Kennedy and were involved in that role, it would be worth investigating this. We've had a year, but really haven't gone into it. The gentleman's name is Helmut Streicher, S-T-R-E-I-C-H-E-R, Helmut Streicher, and I was giving the chronology of his work as a double agent. Now, he was a spy for Germany, and he came to the United States in 1939, 1940. His cover was a German journalist. This is interesting because now we know how Mr. Peter Drucker and Fritz Kramer and Henry Kissinger's family came into this country in the same time period, and I've accused them of being Nazi spies. He was a double agent for Hitler, who then went on to the Russian front in 1942 and worked with Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence, and Otto Skorzeny, the same team that was involved in the Battle of the Bulge, that were involved with collecting the top German generals after the war and putting them in the company of our OSS and incorporating them into the future CIA, Hitler's top people. He was involved with the training of the Cuban invasion, the attempt to get rid of Fidel Castro, and the Bay of Pigs operation. He was active in the Middle East, in Africa. He was in Israel. He was training at Langley, Virginia, and was involved in the Congo with the CIA murderer Patrice Lumumba, and was telling about how the United States had invested more than $10 billion in South Africa and the gold mines and so forth, and kept the soldiers of fortune going for tremendous profits. And then he said one of the worst kept secrets of the company, which is the CIA, is the truth of President Kennedy's murder. And he talks about the murder of John Kennedy. And as I say, this is the 20th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination, and a lot of people will want to say, well, if there was a conspiracy, it was the organized crime syndicate. Here's a fellow who says, I was involved, and these were the people that were involved. He's very open about it. Now, 1 year ago, tonight, I had a broadcast, May 23rd, broadcast number 546, a very important broadcast. If you're new listeners and don't have that tape, you really should send for it and have it as a collector's item. It was called Treason's Pieces, P-I-E-C-E-S, sort of a play on word after the book Treason's Peace, which is the story of I.G. Farben and the selling or the giving away of America. This was Treason's Pieces, and it's the area where I was zooming in on who is Fritz Kramer, the Battle of the Bulge, Otto Skorzeny, Mr. Himmler, and the meeting of the Nazis that were planning since 1943 to go underground, and how they were involved in this particular area where the battle took place, where so many Americans were killed, and then they all ended up with the top officials of a future that were to run our government, such as Henry Kissinger and Omer Ammengau, with the top Nazi officers. And this program that I had, I played a song at the end of the program I never put on the broadcast except to open and close for some particular reason, a song of Stephen Sondheim's from Pacific Overture, which is about the selling or giving away of Japan by the Japanese officials when the Americans first appeared with their gunpowder. And it has to do with the Treaty House. And that evening, there was a music show, and various people from KLRB had been driving south from San Jose listening, or Santa Cruz, listening to the broadcast, and the station manager and so forth were there. And I know they were outraged at this because I was very angry when I began to understand, and I've understood a lot of this country for a long time, how while people were fighting and winding down the war, that the top people like Allen Dulles and John McCloy and the Kissingers and the Kramers, who later takes care of the whole Pentagon, were all conniving and planning for 2 years on what they would do afterwards. Well, the Americans are thinking that the battle is us against the Germans, and the Germans are working with us, planning the next one against the Russians. Well, anyway, I was commenting and angry, and it was a very important broadcast, and then I got a call in the middle of the week saying, that's it. There's no more World Watchers. We're going 24-hour music, no more talk radio. And there was a 2-week interim, and there were 2 stations here that I was invited to be on right away, and within 2 weeks I was at Kazoo. The other is a privately owned station here, and I decided that a very conservative man who owns it, I decided not to be at the mercy of sponsors who call in that this is a listener-sponsored station, and if you appreciate it, you can send money to the station, and we have the freedom, as long as they have the people paying to support the station, to stay on the air. And this was a better arrangement. I thought it was a better arrangement. So it's worked out fine, and I've been on almost a year. But what took the thing that really blew them was the betrayal of the Americans, and I think that was the program that got to them. One quick item, a story in the news now, getting onto the news, there's so much. San Francisco Examiner, May 19th, 1983. A story about Terry Moore winning Howard Hughes cash. Many of you who are long listeners know that I met Terry. I went down to Hollywood to make a movie called The Hughes Mystery with Manuel Zacina. The movie film was cut up once. It was spliced a second time. He had to flee the country. He was from Guatemala and Nicaragua, rather. And the movie was suppressed. And I met Terry from Manuel Zacina, and we became friends. And I went down and told her a lot about the Hughes organization. She didn't know, and she told me a lot about Howard. And I got a lot of valuable information from her, and from her I met Johnny Meyer, who's up in Canada at the present time. And Terry won the court case that she was married to Howard Hughes, and the article says that she'll get a chunk of the late billionaire's estate, his estate is huge, amounting to over $2 billion. But the article says that she'll get a sizable amount, enough to live in luxury the rest of her life, just using the interest. Well, then it also said that her book may become more interesting now that the final chapter can be added to the book, that she had trouble getting a publisher, but there'll be more interest, that the court has recognized the 1949 arrangement on the high seas on his yacht. It says the decision said it wasn't necessarily proof that she was his wife. However, it was valuable to recognize the court that she was with him quite a long period of time, and up to 8 years, and so she's going to get a settlement. Terry got ripped off. I'll do the strange story of Terry Moore from one saga to the other. She'll give me permission. Some of it is just an amazing story. She's the unsinkable Molly Brown, and I wish her luck. She had some interesting marriages to this Mr. McGrath. His brother's the Archbishop in Panama. I've mentioned him. And Stuart Kramer III, and Howard Hughes, and she had a football player from Texas in between. But she has seen a lot, and she's come out. She walked away from certain things, and got hurt and burned because she wasn't the usual kind of starlet in Hollywood. And I just am really happy that this decision came in her favor. Now, I have to update you on 3 articles on Fritz Kramer, and every once in a while, I know that there are new people that start listening to the program. I hate to repeat it for the old listeners and subscribers, but it still isn't clear in some of your minds, and every few weeks I update Mr. Fritz Kramer. I'm pursuing a gentleman named Mr. Anton F.G. Fritz Kramer, who was in the American Army from 1939, German accent, I.G. Farben family, recruited Henry Kissinger to go to Europe to the Battle of the Bulge, put him at Oberammergau and at Harvard University with the help of John McCloy. And Nelson Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger then became National Security Advisor, and you know the route, what he's done to this country, his secret bombings in Cambodia and the murder of Allende and in Pakistan, the overthrow of the government. We could do plenty on him. But I've been after Kramer, trying to find out about him, because one, Kramer came to this country and recruited Kissinger, went back to Europe, and I've traced his army papers. And there was another Mr. Fritz Kramer, who was Hitler's important general. And I finally obtained a photograph of Fritz Kramer in the United States, who was head of the plans of the Pentagon for years, the advisor to the top officers of the Pentagon. I got a picture of him, I told you before, and I got a picture of the Nazi general Fritz Kramer in the Battle of the Bulge. And I sent Mr. Fritz Kramer in Washington, D.C. to the Institute on Strategic Trade. We've talked about that. I gave you the address. May the 7th, I wrote my letter. It's the Is This You letter. Dear Mr. Kramer, enclosed is a picture of Fritz Kramer taken in 1944 from the Battle of the Bulge. Is that your picture? This is Hitler's Kramer. Are you the same Fritz Kramer? Very short. One more sentence. If you are not the same person, can you tell me where I can locate the other Fritz Kramer in any history book after the Malmedy trials in 1946? Thank you, Mae Brussell. That was written May the 7th, 1983. This is a tax-deductible institution. I have the telephone, and there's an answering service. You write, and they don't answer. Maybe we should wonder, it's obviously a Defense Department front, but he didn't answer. Now, a friend of mine went up to the Stanford Library, the Hoover Institution on War, Revolution, and Peace. This is the repository of Goebbels' diaries and Hitler's mementos and Himmler's mementos and the Russian czars, and it is for students of history. And a World Watcher listener went up to the Hoover Institute. He went up before to get information on the Malmedy trial, and there's about a page of testimony on Fritz Kramer I haven't had on the air yet, but he looked up the section on World War II. That's what I want. I have a lot on the American. I say American in quotes because he's German. Okay. So I want the German Fritz Kramer. So he goes to the section on World War II, a card index, looks through the systems. They have notebooks, and they find the name Fritz Kramer. He sees his name on the index file, and there's an interrogation of him, what happened in 1944. The number he requested was CO24. So, and then he goes down to the basement and comes back with large boxes of files and folders and opens the box, and lo and behold, CO24 is missing. The manuscript is not there. It is the documents and archives of Hitler's generals, but CO22 is there, and CO25 is there. These are notebooks on Hitler's generals, but CO23 and CO24 are missing. So Mr. Fritz Kramer is missing from the historical division of the Hoover Institute on War, Revolution, and Peace, and that's what I'm trying to find out. Anything on the German Kramer, but you see what I mean about it being difficult. Now, the third point I want to make about Fritz Kramer, why I'm emphasizing him so much, why he's so important. The Washington Post has a story, Monday, May 16th, 1983, page A9. It's a picture of 5 people from the National Security Staff who are the advisors to Ronald Reagan. And they go in the White House with Mr. William Clark of Military Counterintelligence, who runs the National Security Agency. And it tells how they have access to the president, where Henry Kissinger and Mr. Brzezinski sort of ran the show with Jimmy Carter and with Richard Nixon, that the National Security Advisor has Clark bringing these people in to advise the President of the United States. They have this high position. There's a Jeffrey Kemp, K-E-M-P, from the National Security Council, who's the White House advisor. Alfonso Sapio Bosch, B-O-S-C-H, he's the Latin American advisor. Paula Dobriansky, D-O-B-R-I-A-N-S-K-Y, is the East European advisor. She's only 27 years old. John I can't pronounce it, but I'll spell it for you. Lenczowski, L-E-N-C-Z-O-W-S-K-I. He took over the position of Richard Pipes when Pipes went back to Harvard. He's violently anti-Soviet. He's in the Department of the Soviet Union for the National Security Council. He's 32 years old. He has never been to the Soviet Union. He's the ranking expert on Eastern affairs in the Soviet Union. Dobriansky's 27 and Lenczowski is 32. He says you don't have to be hit by a locomotive to know it's dangerous, and he is against the Soviet Union with the most violent terms, and he's the advisor to Ronald Reagan. Now, under him and along with him, sharing his opinion, is Sven Kramer, S-V-E-N K-R-A-E-M-E-R. That is the brat that I talked about who worked with the great mafia Nazi collector of young American youth, Reverend Moon. Sven Kramer was instrumental with the Korea Gate story and Tongson Park. This article says that Sven Kramer is a senior defense specialist who has worked for 4 presidents, Can you imagine? I knew he worked for the National Security Council. Daddy just resigned as plans officer for the entire Pentagon a couple of years ago. He's worked for 4 presidents, shares Lansowski's assessment, and knows what happens when fascists take control. Now, he says he and his mother were held as hostages by the Nazis in Germany for 6 years. Remember how outraged I was at the Washington Post article a couple of weeks ago on the Hitler diary story where it said that SS Wolf and Mr. Monkey, who was from the death's head, Himmler's death's head, the SS, 2 of the most dangerous and notorious Nazis in the entire world of the whole Odessa file, were unimportant recruits from 1929 who were unimportant. Well, this has to be the tallest lie of the century, that Sven Kramer, and that's why Kissinger and Brzezinski and Kramer are so important, and Helene vonDamm, who came in through William Clark of the National Security Council. Now, if you read the Washington Post, going back March 2nd, it was 1975, it tells how Daddy, Sven Kramer's grandfather, was with a Habsburg, working with the Habsburgs, was a judge at a very terrible time in German history when the courts were being overturned and the guilty were being locked up and the innocent were freed. His mother had her money from a chemical company. His daddy got a degree in Frankfurt and in Munich and went on after there to Italy, close to the Italian Mussolini fascism. He married a woman from Norway, Sweden rather, and then took the pregnant wife to London because Fritz Kramer wanted his little baby to be a British citizen, okay? So he doesn't say, I want to take him away from fascism like Germany where Mama is or Italy where Mussolini is. He wanted a British citizenship, just like that Stryker is a double agent for Hitler in this country and in the CIA. These people want double citizenship. Then Sven is born February 3rd, 1938. Then he takes Sven back to Germany. In 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. Now, you think Hitler was such a pussycat in 1938 and 39. He takes them to Wiesbaden, to Mama, wife, and new baby, and he comes to America. If he can come into America, Mr. Fritz Kramer, and put on an army uniform and recruit Henry Kissinger, if he can be in military intelligence, why can't he bring his wife and baby to the country at the same time? Why does he leave them in Germany? He's talking about oppression, and he has left them with this country that is so oppressive, which is Nazi Germany. At the same time, Uncle Dr. William Kramer, Fritz Kramer's brother, was interned in London as a German spy, rounded up and as a suspect when Germans were rounded up. So here you have Sven Kramer advising 4 presidents. He's only 45 years old. He goes, you see, Dad's at the Pentagon and son is in the National Security Council, just as Alexander Haig's child is overseas with U.S. information and Mr. Clark's child is over there. And the Joe Jaworski set up a new CIA foundation with the Anderson funds that his dad had. These kids continue. And this man can advise Ronald Reagan. Where is Reagan getting his cards? When he reads his lectures, when he reads his speeches? Sven Kramer, 4 presidents, only 45 years old. Daddy has the Pentagon. He's like John Dean or these young gophers going back and forth, wanting that war against Russia. He was not a hostage by the Nazis in Germany in any way, shape, or form. They survived just fine. And when the Battle of the Bulge was over, when the war was over, old Fritz comes in and knocks on the door and says, hi, Mama, hi, baby. Let's get on to the United States. I'm going to run the Pentagon. And first we got to get Henry into Harvard, okay? I got my law degrees. We'll get Henry in Harvard. Then he'll be National Security Advisor, and Sven will be his slave, his gopher. That's the way it works. I am so disgusted by the chronology of it. I think you can get by the tone of voice, but it's more than just academic to study who these people are. The decisions they make of who lives, who dies, who goes to war, how much we're going to spend on weapons, how much gas, how much on atomic bombing machines. This is Sven, right off the apple from his dad and mom, National Security Advisor. Now, this last week, May the 17th, Helene vonDamm was sworn as envoy to Austria. I sent approximately, I don't know how many letters, $200 of postage and printing money to members of the Senate Intelligence Committee. I wasn't aware of any hearings about her appointment. They're supposed to have investigations, and the Senate is to vote. She came to the United States in 1959 from William Clark, from military counterintelligence from Otto von Bolschwing's network, which was the Galen-Eichmann network, and she came out to California to work for Ronald Reagan, and then she went on to make appointments for him when he was president. Now she's going back to Vienna, the home of Otto Skorzeny and the Odessa network and Adolf Hitler's shenanigans. She is our ambassador to Vienna. It seems that the steamroller is going, and nothing can stop it. I don't mean to sound too gloomy, but you have to be realistic that there are not enough people that are aware of this insidious network that never ceased to exist. Now, one reason people sit back and they're so complacent is that they trust people like Simon Wiesenthal, the typical fraud of the world, to do their work for them, to look out for them, to look out for the Nazis. Wiesenthal didn't find Eichmann. He takes credit for it. The people that found him tell the truth about it. He's made every kind of a deal, and I have absolutely no regard for him one way or the other. But there are two stories in the paper this week that give you an idea of what other people think about Wiesenthal or what he's doing. One was from the Los Angeles Weekly, April 22nd, 1983. Wiesenthal has a dinner party at the Waldorf Astoria to name the Humanitarian of the Year. The Humanitarian Award, in case you didn't read it and you might have, went to U.S. Ambassador of the United Nations, Jeane Kirkpatrick. And the article that I have about Jeane Kirkpatrick says, in quotes, for years she was an apologist for neo-Nazi regimes in South America, first as the CIA-associated propagandist frontwoman, then as Reagan's UN ambassador. She has maintained close ties with and done yeoman work for anti-Semitic juntas such as Argentina, Guatemala, Paraguay. She's a strong supporter of the Bolivian junta when they gave refuge to Klaus Barbie. She supports the neo-fascists. She's huckstered for them long before the administration, including Barbie's protectors, came forward and the connections were made of them, the CIA, to Klaus Barbie. She was there, and now the dinner was a fundraiser. Kirkpatrick is strong among the New York Jews, and she was named as just say we want to raise money. Here's Jeane Kirkpatrick, but the humanitarian of the award. I think the Jews are going crazy. And Simon Wiesenthal was the one who wanted her to have the humanitarian award. Okay, now, this last week, May 17th, I read about an organization. Maybe you've heard about it. Hey, maybe you haven't. It's called the Resistance International, and it's been set up in Paris. One of the founders of the group is Simon Wiesenthal. I'll tell you the punchline before I tell you the story. The purpose of the group is a counteroffensive against Soviet imperialism. The purpose of Resistance International is to act as a counterweight to the European peace movement, and they say that's infiltrated by the Soviets. So to counter this, a group of people, refugees from communist ruled countries, have formed what they call the Resistance International. A well-known Cuban, someone from the Soviet, someone from Afghanistan, someone from Poland, from Laos, from China, from the communist countries, Mozambique. The only right-wing government is that they are apprehending is Argentina. But they don't talk about Chile or Paraguay or Uruguay or Colombia or Philippines or South Korea or Saudi Arabia or South Africa or El Salvador, Guatemala, Peru, Brazil, Honduras, you name it. They have set up a group, an organization. The goal of Resistance International is to resurrect a spirit of resistance against Soviet imperialism, and one of the people of this group is none other than Simon Wiesenthal, who's been acting as, I guess, one of the heads of the board that was put on there. Another one is Eugene Ionesco. I told you I went to hear him at Monterey Institute. He was one of my favorite playwrights, and The Rhinoceros was against oppression and about freedom, and his other plays. But I wondered why the Monterey Institute, which is closely associated not only with the CIA, but John McCone is on the board of directors of the Institute. They just gave an honorary doctor's degree. He was CIA director at the time John Kennedy was murdered and worked with these Nazi fascist creeps in that position and with the organized crime syndicate. From Bechtel McCone, John McCone, he had invited Eugene Ionesco to speak there, and I couldn't figure out why Ionesco was talking there. Now I read that he's in Monterey 2 weeks ago, and now he's in Paris with the resistance group to call attention to the Soviet oppression and to counterweight the peace movement in Europe. That's just what we need. Now, I do want to talk about the Hitler's Diaries. I have a few more minutes on this side of the tape, the broadcast, and then I'll do more. But I don't want you to think, I didn't mention them last week, we were talking about the Howard Hughes Organization and Chester Davis. I'll get back to that. I don't want you to think that I've forgotten Hitler's diaries. There's stories here that are very important. Save all your articles and read them carefully. Don't let them pass you up. Don't say, it's a fraud. Oh, boy, they wanted money. I got a notice from Tom Davis, who has research where he supplies books for the various people that study history, that want to study it. He has new books and old books you can get from him. He sent me a notice of a book that's available out of Phoenix, Arizona. And regarding the Hitler's diary, there's a book called Hitler's Secret Backers, Research Publications, Box 39850, Phoenix, Arizona, 85069, 1495. And in this book about Hitler's backers, there's references on page 16 to Hitler playing nervously with his notebook. This was written in 1930. Page 35, Hitler took out his little notebook, 1931. This book was written a while ago, and it refers to the writings that Hitler did, where he did, in fact, keep notes, and I'll order the book and see what's in there. I mentioned some characters that were involved that were interesting with the diary. Conrad Fisher is a gentleman I'll go into more next week. Conrad Fisher is the man who collects the military relics and allegedly received the money for whoever did the writing. He's located in Stuttgart. A man for G who's involved with this, the West German police will not reveal his name, is located in the United States. William Hodel, H-O-E-T-T-L-E, lives in Austria, where vonDamm will be. The home base was once Skorzenny's. Hodel was one of the highest ranking of the Himmler's SS and the Death's Head. He helped form the Odessa, and then Martin Bormann did the genius financial backing of it. He was very important. And Francois Genoud, G-E-N-O-U-D, lives in Switzerland. So Mr. Hartmann is in Germany. Gerd Heisman, he got a death threat this week. Mr. Genoud is in Switzerland. Fisher's in Stuttgart. Manfred is in the United States. Hodel is in Austria. The pieces of the Odessa surfaced. I don't know why at this time. And keep in mind, you have to have one of three opinions or roll them around. One, that Hitler absolutely died. Two, that Hitler escaped. Or three, I don't know. But I want to give you a couple of references to newspaper articles because they're accumulating so fast on this story. One was from the New York Times, May the 6th, saying the diaries are forgeries, but it said, the police handwriting experts in the Rhineland-Palatinate state, P-A-L-A-T-I-N-A-T-E state, had confirmed the authenticity of Hitler's handwriting. The experts had these sheets, 4 single sheets of the drafts, in 1982, and also Stern magazine had this material for 2 years. These documents were there the last 2 years. New York Times, May the 8th, said the diaries came in installments and they had a chance in the last 2 years to check it out. Now, they spent $3 million. Why wouldn't they check it out? London Times, May 8th, said that sources from Stern said the identity of the people is kept secret, but they were able to check any of the documents in their purchase to see if they were genuine. They didn't have to print them. They were given to them to check to see if they were genuine. And if they didn't turn out to be genuine, that was their own problem, Mr. Heidemann said. They had them for 2 years. They had documents, and there was the possibility that they were. I'll do more on that on the second half of this broadcast. We'll take a break for 1 minute now and then get back to the second half. This is Mae Brussell. It's KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove, California, and it's part 2 of broadcast number 598. The Los Angeles Herald had a story about the villagers where the airplane was supposed to have crashed in Bornersdorf, Germany, and Hitler's valuable papers were supposed to have been retrieved there. Remember, that was the first story? Well, the article said that the villagers all knew that the diaries were nonsense, that the papers were fake, that they didn't come from there, that a particular person, however, did reach the plane crash. His name was Richard Elbe, E-L-B-E, and nothing was saved from the crash except some papers did survive, but not many. Well, what were those papers? And then he went on, the article goes on to say that the mayor was a Nazi and that he got the papers, Max Goebel, G-O-E-B-E-L. and they assumed that he would have burned them to keep them from enemy hands. But I can't imagine the Nazis burned anything that belonged from Der Fuhrer and marked from the bunker, and with the seal and papers and Hitler's most important papers that left the bunker just before the end of the war, before they closed shop there. So some papers did, in fact, exist. Then the London Times, May the 8th, has a story. The tests were done on only a few pages. These 3 or 4 pages may well have been genuine since they passed several forensic tests. But when you have a complete set of Hess volume and 7 of diaries submitted that were quickly found to be fake, whoever selected the 4 separate pages for testing rather than submitting a complete volume may have been aware that a forgery was involved. Now, pardon me if I'm confused, but if the diaries and the papers couldn't have been written on until after 1964 because a certain kind of ink and a certain kind of paper wasn't used, then how could genuine documents be included as part of that series? If it was different paper and ink, they would have seen that. They had 2 years to see that. Now, Heidemann worked for Stern for a long time, 30 years, and that was his bread and butter. He did a lot of stories for them. And Trevor Roper's on the board of the London Times. Why would they get their reputations? Trevor Roper says, I'll put mine on the line. I have to repeat and ask the question, why would they put their reputation on the line? And also, why is this hushed so fast? The German government said, we will go to the end of the world to find out who wrote these papers, but they dropped the case like a hot potato and said it's Stern's involvement and we're not interested anymore. Just that's it. It's out. Mrs. Heidemann, Gina Heidemann, said in the London Sunday Times, I know they are genuine. He just couldn't tell you everything. Maybe somebody mixed genuine with forged ones, but he can't tell you. There's more to it. And I believe there is. And as I say, now he's getting death threats. So that is one way, like the Roberta Calvi story with Banco Ambrosiano, or Kevin McCullough with the Edwin Wilson story, and these various Mr. Duberstein with the CIA story. The death threats come before the story gets out. The London Observer said the verdict of the scientists was conclusive that they could not possibly have been written until long after Hitler was dead, but they had some hesitation about it. And in the London the London Times, they said that the archives didn't come in toto in a single source. Some was forgeries, but it may also contain genuine documents. This is London Sunday Times, May the 8th, 1983. It contains forgeries, but it may also contain genuine documents. Well, where do they leave off, and where do they pick up? It can't be both. And then the article says someone in possession of genuine Hitler documents could use them as a smokescreen and mix them. Well, you could tell the paper and ink, if you go through a series, I'm sure that you have to sift out if they're forgeries or not. And the important thing, as I say, is that Stern had them. According to the New York Times, May the 11th, Stern had them as early as 1980. Now, another article that I read made fun of Mr. Heidemann and told what a clown he was and a buffoon, and not to take him seriously, because he even once wrote a story that Martin Bormann was alive. Can you imagine what a fraud that was? He told us Bormann was alive. Well, Bormann is alive. This has been confirmed by everyone now. So who were the people that said Bormann was dead? I mean, that's more important if you understand what I'm saying. He wrote the ridiculous story, knowing these people and traveling with them and seeing all the top Nazis and the heads of the Odessa. He says Bormann's alive. He's seeing him, and the Western world is saying, this man's so ridiculous, he even said Bormann was alive. Well, so much. I'll get back to the Hitler Diary more, but the intimation, the part is accurate, even to this day, to say that, but parts aren't, leaves a lot to be asked and a lot of questions to be asked. Not that we'll get the answers, but we can at least put the questions into some framework. Now, there are 2 articles that came in the newspaper this week that I thought were more important to share with you than updating the Howard Hughes or the Young Americans for Freedom or the connections of Mr. Colonel Willoughby and Douglas MacArthur and Joe McCarthy that we were on. I'll get back to those threads later, but these articles were important because they are things I wrote about in 1972 and 73. They are 2 items that are in the news in 1983, and they can portend a dangerous future if you had a script for a Reichstag to take over the government at the time, say in Los Angeles, the Olympic Games, these would be the people to do it. Now, the first article, you may have seen a picture of a man, Dr. Ross Addy, A-D-E-Y, with a LIDA machine, L-I-D-A, and this picture of him in the San Francisco Chronicle, the Associated Press, and also San Jose Mercury. Now, the lead story is Russian machine that tranquilizes people. And the other story says Soviet machine sends brain into trance by radio waves. Okay, the Russians, the Soviets have it, right? But Dr. Ross Addy, I saw his name. I picked up the phone and called Paul Krasner. I said, Paul, I was writing about Ross Addy in your Realist in 1973. And in the story of agencies to dismantle. The story of Ross Addy now is that he's the chief of experimentation at the Jerry L. Pettis Memorial Veterans Hospital. That's down in San Bernardino. And he's working with a device which he says the Russians have had since 1960. But our CIA has had it in the 1970s. We were testing these low-frequency radio waves over Los Angeles and San Francisco. I don't know where else, but this is California, the home of the Mind Control Center work. Okay, Stanford Research, University of California, and UCLA, and Davis. And this is saying the Russians had in 1960. They said this is an ethical, political question. The machine called the LIDA is on loan to Jerry Pettis to the Memorial Hospital to test it on veterans, two-time losers. They fight for your country, they end up in a hospital, and then they get tested. And Ross Addy is Chief of Research of Veterans Hospital. Well, I came across his name and tried to stop that UCLA school for studying violent behavior in 1972 when I accused him of working with Nazi scientists and Gestapo techniques to work on our brains. For the LA Star, I wrote an article. If any of you don't have it, I'll have reprints made for you. Just send a self-addressed stamped envelope. The article is called UCLA Institute to Study Murderville, USA. It was about violent behavior and Ronald Reagan's administration, who was in charge, and how they were going to put this experimentation school at UCLA to put electrodes in brains and radio waves. And I have a list of the various doctors involved. Dr. Jolly West, who was involved with the SLA and all kinds of cases, from Jack Ruby's psychiatrist. He moved out from Oklahoma to UCLA. In the article in 1972, I wrote, among the other doctors, and there's a whole list, it's quite a long article, Dr. Ross Addy, UCLA physician from NASA, was defended recently in a $2 million lawsuit against brain experimentation in animals. The explanation that animals, he said, feel no pain was indicative of his lack of regard for the personality of an individual. Pain is not the criteria alone in such a case. You see, with a lobotomy, you take a needle, put it through the eye, puncture the brain, they can't think anymore. There may not be pain when you wake up, but there may not be a brain, and that's what they're doing. And I wrote then that pain is not the criteria. How many UCLA doctors around the country, such as in Los Angeles, are involved in these procedures? And I mentioned 4 that were involved in lawsuits of treacherous activity and experimentation, 4 of them, and one of them was this Dr. Ross Addy, and he worked with the Nazi NASA scientists. And in the Realist, 1 year later, I had a section called The Martial Law Without the Riots. That article was titled, the main Realist article was called The Senate Select Committee as Part of the Cover-Up. And I had institutions to dismantle. I had 2. One was the Institute to Study the Causes of Violent Behavior in Los Angeles, and the other was the Office of Emergency Service. And I wrote, this was for Paul Krasner in The Realist, that this Institute to Study Violent Behavior was set up by Ronald Reagan, his answer to solve violence during 1975 when Senator Sam Ervin stopped them from doing these experiments on people. I wrote that 25% of the Gestapo are doing painful and subhuman experiments. They came here from Nazi Germany. They're from the leading universities, and now they're with NASA scientists such as Dr. Ross Addy working at UCLA, who's justifying brain experimentations and so forth. And I figured him as a very dangerous man. Now, that was 11 years ago that I was writing about Ross Addy, and now he is into the brainwave and making it think that the Soviets are doing, when I have all the documentation in the Senate hearing about our own government doing. We're not borrowing from the Soviets. It's political. It's controversial. It's horrible. And then in the newspaper this week, it was a small story. I didn't see it, but David Emory up north caught it, luckily, in the Chronicle, or it wasn't in my edition. Our governor, Deukmejian, Deukmejian, if you are typing this up and spelling it, Deukmejian, has appointed a former CIA official to the Office of Emergency Service. His name is William Medigovich, Medigovich, 43 years old, Medigovich. He's worked for the CIA. He worked for Evil Younger in California for the organization, the Bureau of Organized Crime, which I call inviting the mafia to California, and criminal intelligence, which is using provocateurs such as Donald DeFreeze and others, Colston Westbrook and so forth, that set up the SLA, for one example. Now, Deukmejian has appointed a former CIA official as director of the State Office of Emergency Service. Now, in 1973, I thought that should be dismantled, and I published that at the height of the Watergate story under martial law without the riots, and this is what I had along with the UCLA school. The Office of Emergency Service. We all need warning and protection from national disasters, natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes. That cover story could be the excuse for the diabolical 1984-ish James McCord secret warning system that is being pushed today. See, they were planning a military coup, a takeover in 1972 that was stopped, and Watergate halted that. McCord was in charge of the military emergency, again, the Fritz Kramer Pentagon gang. And what I said was that they were planning two-way radio in every home to protect us. Ronald Reagan, hoping to be president, is pushing hard in California for the Office of Emergency Service. See, in 1973, I published that Reagan was pushing for this and that he would get it. And then I used an example of Roseville, California, test on military equipment where they exploded to further justify the office. They had an agent provocateur shindig where they blew up some trains up there to test the emergency service. And I said that this was a provocateur-type operation. Well, Reagan is president. The Office of Emergency Service has the CIA in it. And it's important because we have to watch the Olympic Games with Marvin Davis and 20th Century Fox having exclusive photographic rights with Henry Kissinger and Gerald Ford and Madame Chenault on the board of 20th Century Fox, and William Rogers and the same team from the old Nixon, Rebozo, organized crime, terror network, from the violence provocateurs that they have supplied, the assassination teams working, the Defense Department, the intelligence community, the FBI. This team is well organized. In the photographic rights for the Olympics go to 20th Century Fox. Here we have a NASA scientist studying mind control with electronic radio waves, which he's pretending we borrowed from Russia. He'll say we have to use it because Russia has it, okay? We've had this over Los Angeles and San Francisco at least as early as the 70s when I studied it. So we have 20th century film in the Olympics. We have this man in San Bernardino still working, experimenting on veterans, on their brains, because we stopped him from working on blacks, widows, and children at UCLA, so he's taken to the Veterans Hospital. And then you have the Office of Emergency Service with the same CIA people that worked with Evil Younger and Roseville, California, that I spotted as a danger spot that would duplicate what they couldn't do in 72, they would do in 84. It's too bad I don't do more writing. I'm not... I don't know. I'm lazy about getting it down. I should get it more down and read it. Everything I've written, I enjoy to go back and read over again because I have the dates, I have the names of the people, the CIA, the Roseville operation, the Office of Emergency Service, and the UCLA school, and Dr. Ross Addy. So in 1983, I opened my newspapers and hear the same names, the same people, the same places, and they're more powerful than ever. The only thing that got busted up in the 11 years was the Berkeley Barb, the LA Free Press, the liberals, the WBAI in New York, the free radio, the people that wanted to fight war and oppression, or said they wanted to, that all flaked away. The only thing missing is the left. The right has stayed together very nicely. Now, in the remaining 15 minutes, I want to update so many stories, too, on the Vatican. I could do 2 or 3 hours just on that. Ted Rubenstein and Jonathan Marshall and David Emory are doing a fantastic job up north. And Ted and Jonathan are getting newspapers from Italy on the Vatican stories, the story on the banks, the Banco Ambrosiano, and the links to the Vatican money, the shooting of the Pope, and the connections to now coming to the CIA and not the Bulgarian connections, and we'll update those. But there are three stories I do want to share with you on those because they accumulate too. One is from the Houston Post in March 28th, and I haven't had this with you yet. Vatican Bank may be sued. 80 international banks have lost $300 million when the Banco Ambrosiano collapsed. They are legally trying to recover $125 million. They haven't explained why they're not seeking their entire $300 million loss, but they're only going for part of it from and the links of the Banco Ambrosiano through Luxembourg Holding. The report didn't make clear, as I say, why the banks were seeking part of their losses from the Institute of Religious Work. They have singled out the Vatican for $125 million of the $300 million they lost, and they're asking them, they're going to sue them. They filed the papers. Banco Ambrosiano was Italy's largest private bank. It got involved in 1970 to 1981 with the Vatican banks in the Bahamas. Wow, the mob connections all over the world, but the Bahamas were thick, and that it ties into our congressmen and our Defense Department and our agents that work together, like the Nugan Bank, the military. It wasn't just the Australian bank, the Bahama banks, the Castle Bank, and the banks that Paul Marcinkus was the head of one in the Bahamas. The connections to the past administrations, Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan particularly, and also Jimmy Carter. The dope connections to the tangled to the Panama banks, the Cayman Islands, the offshore bankings. There's new investigations going on, and to untangle that is really a mess. But a good place to start is with a lawsuit, and if the British sue them for their $300 million loss, that would be a good start. Another place to start looking is, strangely enough, the Wall Street Journal. That is the place that should be carrying the floating money, the missing money. And there have been some good articles, not many lately from them, but some. But they advertise right in the middle of a page, not in the back where ads usually come, and they don't have too many ads. They advertise a book called St. Peter's Banker by Luigi Di Fonzo, F-O-N-Z-O, L-U-I-G-I, then a capital D, small I, Fonzo. It's a book that just came out. This is the way they advertise it. On a spring night in 1968, Michel Sindona met privately with Pope Paul VI. He left with complete control of the Vatican's foreign investment and became the Pope's banker. With complete control of the Vatican money. Can you imagine? Now, Pope John the 23rd became Pope in 1958, and he died June 3rd, 1968, just before Kennedy was murdered. And I believe Pope John was offed, too. And in June 3rd, he died. November 22nd, John Kennedy was killed. But Pope John the 23rd, when he died, he had excommunicated Mr. Montini out of Rome into Milan. And when Montini became Pope Paul VI, he was referred to as part of the Milan Mafia. That book, Final Conclave, goes into it at great length. There's quite a few books on this subject now. But Montini came in as Pope Paul VI in 1963, in June of 63, right in from Milan. And along with him, he gives Michael Sindona the Vatican's overseas money. And this book is about that subject. It tells about in 1980 when the bank collapsed, the Franklin National Bank in New York, and the Michael Sindona story exposed. This is what the Wall Street Journal has, a large section. Sindona was convicted of fraud, misappropriation of bank funds, of perjury, of international banking intricacies, relationship with the Swiss bankers, with the Vatican and the Mafia, their conspiracy to launder drug profits, control major currencies by the cooperation of the world's major political figures. You want to know how we get presidents? God's banker. Okay, that's how Mr. Clark, part of the Vatican, Mr. William Casey, Mr. William Buckley, James Buckley. We can go on and on about the higher-ups that are involved in this network. Now, the New York Magazine, April 11th, 1983, has an article sent to me by somebody in New York, a world watcher, It must be a section of the book by Mr. Luigi Di Fonza called Justifiable Homicide. And the son of Michael Sindona is telling how he and his dad got involved in arranging the murder of a judge in Italy who was too close to the truth about his dad. And this judge was gunned down, Giorgio Ambrosoli, Giorgio. I've mentioned him before, Ambrosoli. And he was studying Michael Sindona's holdings, his financial holdings, and he was murdered. And this article shows a picture of the man that was sent to murder him, William Billy the Exterminator Arrico. And I was talking about him on broadcast before he was identified as going to Rome to kill the judge for Michael Sindona. And they're saying the judge died too nicely. They intimate he should have been tortured. But here you have a man working with the Pope, with the Vatican money, the Vatican investments, funded Ronald Reagan, and then Licio Gelli and Roberta Calvi funded Richard Nixon. Then the others, Gelli and Calvi, are funding Ronald Reagan. But here's a man whose son is justifying murder, closely affiliated with the church, and a long reputation with the Gambino family, with organized crime, and it goes into the syndicate. Now, finally, I just want to mention one article that would take an entire evening if we did justice to it. This comes from Jonathan Marshall, December the 11th, 1982. It's a translation of a story coming out of an investigation in Europe on the arrest, maybe you remember in the fall, the arrest of Henry Arsan, A-R-S-A-N. His offices for his organization are in the Banco Ambrosiano, the bank closely affiliated and tied with the Vatican Bank in Milan, the same Milan mafia gang that Pope Paul VI was associated with. And Henry Arsan has been dealing heavily in arms and Bell helicopters and sending NATO equipment to Middle East and Saudi Arabia and other places. And he was had links. He was arrested and he's in jail. He had links to people in Germany and Kuwait, Turkey, Lebanon, Bulgaria, all over the world. But the important thing about this story says it is truly incredible how Henry Arsan was contacted by American and Turkish Secret Service as early as 1973. He was known by the Italian police and continued undisturbed for 20 years under the insignia of his Milan company, Stibaum. Now, 20 years ago was exactly the date when Pope John the 23rd died, when John Kennedy died, and it is exactly the date when Mr. Montini goes from Milan to Rome and takes the Vatican money and gives it to Mr. Sindona, and the Vatican Bank linked to Banco Ambrosiano in Milan, drug trafficking, the narcotics, flooding this country with drugs, getting weapons for the Middle East and all over the world. This story dates exactly the time when Arsan set up headquarters in Milan. It tells you exactly how many years. It tells you the city, and it fits in to the relationship of, say, Richard Nixon, who brought Nazis to this country from 1945-46, who was instrumental with the State Department and the CIA, with the war criminals, who ran against Kennedy in 1960 and didn't win. So when Kennedy was off by 1963, the organized crime syndicate, the dope traffic, linked Marie Chotiner, Bibi Rebozo, Robert Mayu using the apartment of Mo Dallas in the Hughes operation in Nevada, Howard Hughes moving out there and taking over the 5 casinos. We can't do a whole history of organized crime in one evening or the Nazi connections, but I think it's important to know that Mr. Arsan, who was arrested, was known to the American government and the Secret Service and also supplied the Americans. Arsan supplied morphine to Europe and to the United States. He was selling it to the United States in the Banco Ambrosiano building, working with the bank that was closely linked to the Vatican, and the agents Roberta Calvi and Michael Sindona were flowing around the world, international investments and secret dummy fronts in Panama and the Bahamas, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, and so forth. I'll do more on Henry Arsan and stories coming out of Italy that are very interesting, that are translated, but it's pretty bad and it's pretty sick, and the Pope can't do anything because his job, put in by Mr. Brzezinski, is to keep firing us up to get a war against the Soviet Union. Forget the mafia drugs coming in here, forget the gun running, the assassination hit teams. Isn't it becoming pretty obvious after going through these tapes that you listen to with me and listening to the broadcast and sharing the information, how much is out there and then it's just totally ignored. It's just, there's no response. People just read it or publish it, and I hope that books like Trading with the Enemy sell. I hope that this book on the Vatican sells. I hope you people buy these books and read them. They're terribly important. They explain the kind of world we live in, not the kind of world we want to live in, but the way it really is. And the only way to really be sane, I think, is do not fool yourself. If it's ugly, make it better. At least become knowledgeable about it and study it. As I say, I'll do more on our son in the Vatican, and hope that the links of Addy to the Nazis in Frankfurt, in Germany, in Spain, and all over the world will eventually come out. And next week I'll share with you the training of Addy, the man who shot the Pope, with Frank Turpel of the CIA. He trained him to shoot. I mentioned earlier on a broadcast that Turpel was in the St. Peter's, in that area, when the Pope was shot. And a listener sent me from New York, a world watcher, the article of Frank Turpel training Addy. It was in the New York paper. No headlines out here, but little by little, if you get enough people understanding how the world runs and they see these articles, they send them and we share them, and that's what World Watchers is about. Well, that's enough for this evening. This is Mae Brussell on KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove. I hope you have a good week, and I'll be back with you next week, and you take care.